in round 4 of the FIDE World Cup. 4 matches went to the tiebreak, and I'm going to be looking at one of those matches now, and that's between Anish Giri and Radoslav Wojtaszek. Giri, of course, a great prospect for the future. He's already rated number 5 in the world. Wojtaszek's had very good results over the past year or so, so this is a tough one for both players. Okay, it's in English, and this is a well-known line. And here the old move is e5 and then d4 and so on. But the trendy continuation at the moment is just to take on d5 and then play e5. And you could see that the speed that both players were playing these moves, that they were both very well prepared. The time limit for these first tiebreak games was 25 minutes and 10 seconds each time they make a move. So bishop f5, so the knight on e4 gets some extra support from the bishop, and the bishop comes out to a nice diagonal. And now bishop e2 here is the move that a lot of the big players play, but Giri played d4 very, very quickly. He is theoretically very well prepared, as is Wojtaszek normally. Of course, he was in former times a second of Vishwanathan Anand. So bishop b4 looks very natural to pin the knight, and bishop d2 breaking the pin. And here this has been played before, and Black exchanged off the knight on e4 for the bishop. Well, that's possible. No doubt Giri was ready with an improvement, but after about a minute, Wojtaszek exchanged on c3. Wojtaszek was slowing down a little bit at this point, whereas Giri was still moving very, very quickly. And here you have a typical situation where white has a pawn chain in the middle of the board, d4 and e5. Black needs to break down these pawns. The question is, do you do it with c5 or do you do it with f6? So for example, you could play knight c6 and f6 here. I think that's a legitimate way to play the position. Instead, again, after about a minute and a half, Wojtaszek played c5. That's the other way of doing it. But Giri was ready. He was playing his moves almost instantly. And here, again, another thought, a bit of a think by Wojtaszek. After a couple of minutes, he took on c3 and then played bishop e4. He wants to play knight d7, but at the moment, the d5 pawn would be en prise, so that's why he plays bishop e4 first, and only then knight d7. So he's getting ready to recover one pawn at least. And then, the c3 pawn is potentially weak. But a very nice move from Giri. Here one might anticipate a move like queen d4 or something like that. Instead he played knight d4. But this is a really good move. I think Black would very much like to take this pawn. That is potentially the danger pawn, but there's a problem in that White now wins material by force. So f4, the knight moves out of the way, and f5, you win the bishop. So instead, Wojtaszek took on c5. Still looks absolutely fine for Black, I have to say. Potentially a nice knight on c5, potentially weak pawn here. The bishop also looks well placed. But it's incredible the speed that Giri took control in this position. And here again, well, White has potentially a nice pawn majority on the king side, but if you push straight away, then that bishop will lock back into e4, must be okay for Black. But instead Giri played knight b5. I mean, I would anticipate instead queen d2. Knight b5, of course, heading for the d6 square, but somehow it's hard to imagine that the knight is stable there. But actually, it seems fine. If f6, the knight goes in straight away, and Black has to waste time covering that pawn, and White should be okay in that position, or more than okay. But that might have been better than the game continuation. Wojtaszek wanted to try and tackle this spearhead on e5. But this went badly wrong. So first f4, so that practically forces the bishop to move into e4. And now knight d6 gains time against the rook. I think Wojtaszek must have miscalculated something here, because suddenly that knight is looking fantastic on d6, and with c4 white basically manages to reconnect with the knight and destabilize black's position in the center. And here, well, I think optically it's pretty obvious who's doing well here. This is a dream position for white. The knight and bishop pointing at f7, the bishop destabilized, this wonderful pawn spearhead on the king side. I would say this is practically a winning position for white already. And just look at the speed with which Giri wrapped this one up. Queen c2. So this is already pointing at the king side, that's nice. And simply preparing to bring the rook into the middle. Simple play, so potentially threats against the queen checked, king popped in the corner, no danger there. And now white simply wants to push the f pawn. In fact, there's no defense here, no defense at all. The last bit of this game is pretty painful for Wojtaszek. Queen d2, the knight's attacked, took on f5, and now, well, practically everything wins, but a simple exchange sacrifice, and here Wojtaszek resigned. Next the queen comes in, and it's going to be mate on g7 or somewhere around there very, very quickly. A total demolition. I think this has all the hallmarks of Giri's play. Superb preparation and very clear, simple strategy after that. Very effective. So going into game 2 of the tiebreak, Wojtaszek with the white pieces had to win. And the opening went pretty well for him. After 20 moves, they arrived at this position. Wojtaszek has an extra pawn on d5. Now, it's not a simple position to convert to victory, because this knight is potentially slightly awkwardly placed on c7. That needs to be dealt with. And, well, let's see what happened. First of all, Giri with black needed to bring his pieces into play. He did that with bishop g4 and then rook c8, attacking the knight. So, you know, there are potential difficulties with the pin here. First of all, Wojtaszek knocked back the bishop. It went back. And now, here, Wojtaszek made a mistake. He played g4. He should have moved his king out of the way. If that knight is taken, then there's a tactic. This is actually winning for white. If king takes, then the pawn comes up, and here, well, white is going to win this one. So off king b2, black has to move the knight. Then the knight on c7 has to move. Now white is still a clear pawn up here, but of course he has all the winning chances. But I would say this is not simple to win with this wonderful blockading knight on d6. Black has certainly drawing chances. I think technically not an easy position to win for white. Nevertheless, with an extra pawn, he's the one with the winning chances. Instead of that, Wojtaszek played g4, and this was simply an oversight, because after rook takes c7, he had forgotten something. After d6, black can take the bishop with check and then move the knight. Now, this is still not a simple position to convert for black, with these two pawns far advanced in the position. However, even though they're very well advanced, Black has very good blockaders here, and it takes time, but basically Black can maneuver at his leisure and crawl out of his slight bind that he's in. Let's see how Giri managed to do this. Of course, this is the kind of technical position he really enjoys, where he can maneuver and just get things absolutely right. So it looks passive, but actually Black is still fine here. In a sense, there are no weaknesses in Black's position. So the king improves, and now Black needs to somehow bring his pieces into play, in particular the rook. So Giri played h5. It's an excellent move. So in this way, he's going to be able to open a file and possibly the diagonal for this bishop as well, and weaken the kingside pawns. So White can take this, but the king will come to f6, and then the rook will activate, and later on even this h3 pawn can be a target. Very difficult position for Wojtaszek. If you look at this with a computer, you'll see that the computer thinks that White is still okay here. In practice, this is very, very difficult to hold, because, as I said, no real weaknesses in Black's position, and he can maneuver and get it just right. Very tough for White because there's no really good plan here. The rook activates. White can't do much at all. Here we go, and now all these pawns are vulnerable. It's really difficult. Here's a nice moment. So White, of course, wants to push. Knight b8. Excellent move by Black. So preventing d7. And although the pieces are on the back rank, in fact, they're highly effective here. Very nice position for Black. And again, this rook is going to activate, hassling these pawns. And there's not a lot that White can do now. g5 played, rook c1 check, and knight d7, threatening the pawn on c5. Wojtaszek defended this with the rook, but now the rook is totally sidelined. Miserable position. The knight comes back. Now the bishop is free to move because the pressure has been removed from b7 rather. So now the bishop comes to the most glorious post on c6, where the pawn and bishop protect each other, and then the knight comes into play. This is now a dream position for Black. And here, after rook f1, threatening this pawn, well, in fact, White is losing this pawn. If king e3, then rook f3 check. Here, Wojtaszek resigned. So a convincing 2-0 victory for Anish Giri in the tiebreak. So Wojtaszek is out. He goes home with a consolation prize of $25,000, so not a bad tournament for him. So Giri goes through into the quarterfinals. In the other matches, Karyakin, I think, convincingly defeated Andreikin. Elyanov defeated Yakovenko, again quite convincingly. And in the Chinese battle, Ding Liren was defeated by the 16-year-old star Wei Yi. So quarterfinal matchups, Svidler against Wei Yi. That's going to be really interesting. Youth against experience. Anish Giri plays Maxim Vachilegrov. Hikaru Nakamura plays Pavel Elyanov, and Shahriar Mamedyarov against Karyakin. Some big hitters in there. It's going to be very interesting.